All right, welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. We're going to talk about Weird World War III and Weird World War IV today with the editor, Sean Hazlett, and a few of the writers. And maybe a few other things too. It's, what is it, February 27th, 2022. This is the third year of 2020. So hopefully it gets better. I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft eZine. Why don't we do introductions? The panelists introduce themselves, and then the writers, and then let's end with Sean, and he can talk about why he wanted to edit these books and the genesis of these books. How's that sound? Mike Davis. Pete, you want to introduce yourself?
Pete Rawlik. I'm the author of Reanimators, The Weird Company, Reanimatrix, The Peasley Papers, and who knows what else lately. Miskatonic University Spiritualism Club, and the forthcoming Eldritch Equation.
Yeah. That last one, Miskatonic
University Spiritualism Club.
Yeah, I have that in the show note links.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. So, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter. We do have a prize today for our listeners. It is a hardcover volume of this comic anthology, Cthulhu is Hard to Spell. It came from a Kickstarter. It's got lots of individual little stories. Some are funny, some are scary. If you want to win it, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put spell, S-P-E-L-L, in the subject heading. We draw a winner in about 6 weeks or so. You've got plenty of time to enter if you're listening to this later, but you got to play to win.
Matt does this because he's a really nice guy, is one explanation. The other explanation is, yes, he is a nice guy, but his wife is making him clean out some of these books. So this is one way for him to do it.
It's one way to say that I'm doing it.
Okay. Rick, would you introduce yourself?
Rick Lay, writer, pulp magazine collector, author of books on the Shadow and Dark Side.
Yeah, you saw the background too, didn't you? Were you here?
Yes.
I got you and Pete up there. Laird, would you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Laird Barron, writer of crime, mystery, and horror, currently headquartered out of the Mid-Hudson Valley near the Catskills.
And you have electricity back, which is good.
And coming and going, I actually thought I was going to lose it again today. With the
Really?
Howling. We've had a lot of wind and ice storms and whatnot, and we just got out of a storm a couple of days ago, but we didn't get any wind during the storm, just a lot of ice, rain, and snow. But the last 2 days, it's been quite breezy, and we lose our power. We're out in the country. We're not out in the wilderness, but we're definitely out in the country. And yeah, we have a tendency to lose power. If the breeze kicks up, the power goes out, but not today.
As you know, my wife's a high school English teacher in small town Texas. If you know, and we're both from the north. She's from Illinois, I'm from Iowa. But down here, you know, they see a flake might be coming, they cancel school, you know, and they put up all these signs, freeze alert. It gets down to like 45, and they're like, it might get down past 32 degrees tonight, so here's what you do, you know. But she gets more time off that way. So
Right.
Erica, I'm meeting you for the first time. Nice to meet you. Could you introduce yourself?
Nice to meet you. My name's Erica Satifka. I write mostly short stories, kind of dark science fiction, fantasy, not really straight up horror. I have a collection called How Do We Get to Apocalypse and Other Disasters. Because most
Yes,
of the
I
stories
saw that on your Twitter page and it looked interesting. I was going to pick that up sometime.
I've had
Yeah.
about 40 to 45 short stories published over the past 15 years. So, and one novel, but it's out of print now. I've again mostly short stories, but
All right,
Mhm.
great. What's the title of that book again for anyone who missed it?
How to Get to Apocalypse and Other Disasters.
How to Get to Apocalypse and Other Disasters by Erica L.
Satifka.
Satifka. Okay, thank you. And then we have Maurice and Rodney in one panel. Hey guys.
Hey.
You guys
Uh,
co-wrote a story together for this anthology, right?
Correct.
All right. Would you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Maurice Broadus. I am a community organizer, a middle school teacher and librarian, and I'm also a science fiction and fantasy author. Written about a dozen books and just had over 100 short stories published. So it's been quite a little roller coaster for me. And I co-wrote with my friend Rodney.
Hello. Hey. My name is Rodney Carlstrom. This is actually my first short story, so a published short story.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
thank you.
First of many, I'm sure.
First of many.
And you are a school librarian, Maurice?
Yes. Yep. So doing all the things.
Is there a hellmouth in the library, underneath the library or anything?
No, apparently though there's a lot of mysteries because I have the second in my middle school detective novel series coming out later on this month, or in about a month or so also. So lots of apparently mysteries to be solved by middle school students.
All right. Well, if I accidentally refer to you as Giles, forgive me. So
I got you.
last but not least, Sean Hazlett, you're the editor of both of these books. Tell us about yourself. You're muted, buddy. You're muted. There you go.
So, name's Sean Hazlett. I am from Wilmington, Delaware originally. I'm living out in the East Bay area, San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a former or an Army veteran, kind of a finance executive out here. The two anthologies, let me stop. I write military science fiction and weird fiction and horror. And I edited two anthologies, Weird World War III and Weird World War IV. In terms of how these two anthologies came about, the first was obviously Weird World War III, and I pitched a few ideas to Bain, and this idea is kind of one of the only books where I have such an eclectic background that I could almost pull it off. And the theme of the anthology was, if the US were to go to war or had gone to war with the Soviet Union and there was not a nuclear exchange, or not a full end of the world sort of nuclear exchange, John Langan's story has a little bit of one. What would that world look like? But it has to have had a weird element. So think Tom Clancy meets H.P. Lovecraft, or Tom Clancy meets Stephen King. And the reason I think I have a unique background for it is when I was in the military, I spent 5 years at the Army's National Training Center. And at the National Training Center, there's an organization called the Opposing Forces. So I became an expert on Soviet doctrine and tactics, and learned how to beat the US military fighting like the Russians. I promised the audience that I wasn't predicting what was, or at least when I pitched this anthology,
podcast today is kind of timely.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes.
But I promise I wasn't thinking that, because I pitched it back in 2018 or 2019, and that's how it got started. And before I pitched it, I asked authors if they'd be interested in putting together stories, and I had a lot of really great authors. David Drake has a story in the first one.
Mike
Erica
Resnick.
Satifka also has, Mike Resnick. It's either his last story or one of his last stories before he passed.
Yeah.
So which he was a great, I see him as many writers do, as one of my mentors, and I'm thankful that he was able to participate. So fast forward to Weird World War IV. So after after that first volume was published, I pitched two more ideas to Bain. One was Weird World War I and Weird World War II. And I had a bunch of authors that, had agreed to write it. And the publisher, to their credit, said, a lot of that might have been a little overdone. I still want to do it. I know authors would love to write those stories. I would love to write, those sorts of stories myself. But to the publisher's credit, they're like, well, it's not really, there's kind of nothing new under the sun. I would beg to differ, but I think it's fair from a commercial standpoint. And they said,
Yeah,
well, why don't you
yeah.
consider doing kind of a weird World War IV? And I immediately thought to Einstein's quote, right, which is, I don't know what
Yeah.
weapons World War III will be fought with, but I do know what World War IV will be fought with is, rocks, right?
Right.
But to be clear though, I wanted to still have a good diversity of ideas in this volume. So I didn't want people to just focus on post-apocalyptic. They could also conceive of futures where it's just another world war where something different happens. So there is a great mix of kind of a post-apocalyptic stories as well as different futures where the weird element kind of throws things on its head. So there's as an example, there's a Brian Trent story where the world fought a conventional World War III, and then they had another species, like a transdimensional species, invade, right? And that kind of kicks off a weird World War IV, so to speak. But anyway, that's the concept behind Weird World War IV. There were 3 elements that each story had to have. Number 1, there had to have been a World War III. Number 2, there had to have been either the beginning of, the middle of, or the end of World War IV. And then the third element was there had to be just a weird element of some sort. When I pitched all these anthologies, I had a Lovecraftian angle, but if you read some people, there were some people who really skirted on the edge, but came up with some really innovative and intriguing ideas. And I think, Laird and I talked about this on another series of interviews. And one thing that some writers don't like the straitjacket of having to write the theme, but I think it actually brings out even more creativity because it constrains you and your ideas aren't kind of going all over the place. You have to think of interesting and different ways to approach these topics.
Yeah.
And you'll see it. I mean, especially with Weird World War IV, you first have to make one set of assumptions, which kind of takes you on one trajectory, and then you have to make another set of assumptions, which just kind of wildly veers off. So you have this kind of flowering of completely different ideas and topics. So
Well, you kind of set the tone by putting Jonathan Marbury, right?
Mayberry, I think.
Mayberry, yeah.
Mayberry, excuse me. His story first in World War IV, because that's pretty much a straight up Lovecraftian.
Exactly.
And then you have Laird's, which is very weird in a good way. So you have a lot of flavors to this theme from each of these writers.
And then I have, in addition to that, I have one story that's, imagines a future where it's lawfare, where there's bureaucracies, and, the opening salvo is someone, offloads a pallet of paperwork, right? So that's, there's some humorous stories like that. That's pure humor.
TPS
and then,
reports.
yeah, it's well, and that's the other thing too. I'm gonna mention this up front. I would say there's also, between 4 and 6 political stories, right? But they're I would say they without going too much into it, you can read the book yourself, right? But they cover a broad ideological spectrum, right? You have Mamatas, right? He's kind of doing his communism in space story, and he pokes fun at characters in Atlas Shrugged, and it's a good story. It's kind of the
I think it's good to be exposed
Mamatas,
to
right?
different. Yeah, Mamatas. I think it's good to be exposed to different mindsets, especially in the same anthology. You're getting varying viewpoints and mindsets and so forth. So yeah.
And then there's John Langan's story at the very end, which is not a story; it's a play. Well, it's a play, right?
Langan, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's a play.
Yeah,
so there's a ton of creativity that's displayed in this volume.
Speaking of Langan, by the way, anyone out there interested in John Langan's work, and you should be, he's got a new website URL, johnpaullangan.com. That's all you got to remember. Just type in johnpaullangan.com and it'll take you to his website. So, or of course you can go to Amazon and type in John Langan. That works too. So anyway, he was going to try to be here today, but he emailed me at the last minute and said he couldn't quite make it. So, let me ask whoever wants to go first, the writers, what made you guys, what appealed to you about this theme when Sean asked you that you thought, yeah, I'd like to tackle that? Whoever wants to go, or I'll pick a name. Laird, do you want to take that?
I see. Well, for me, I agree with Sean, and this is something that John and I have discussed quite frequently. Actually, I like a good themed anthology, and I enjoy a non-themed anthology. But themed anthologies, in some ways, are where I've had the most fun, because it's easier for me to if I know who else is submitting, it makes it a lot easier for me to predict what not to write about, because I have a tendency to go, okay, so and so writes these kinds of stories, I probably should veer away from that. But also just the reactive nature of, or reacting against the form, within the form, but against it also. But this one is kind of you kind of have your cake and eat it too, because there is a theme, but it's not it doesn't have to be political, it doesn't have to be it doesn't even have to be recognizable. World War III, there's only going to be so many variations on that, where it's the logical variations. But World War IV, who knows? And I was very much attracted to the idea that I could write logically just about anything and make it as weird as I desired.
Yeah, and that's a story that you have to read more than once to even feel like you're understanding it. And I mean that as a compliment. And the other thing, I think, when history looks back on authors who include dogs in their story as much as possible, you're going to be right up there with Dean Koontz, although a much better writer. So your dog in this story is pretty unique. So
thanks. I'm a fan of Rex, and Rex is the recurring or the eternal champion. Although so he appears in quite a few stories in different guises. Like there's my fantasy stories, he's a clockwork dog, which is not just a fancy way of saying that he's an android or a cyborg. He actually is a clockwork dog in some of the stories. So like it's sort of a Stephen King territories thing. It's Rex, but it's another version of Rex. But even with in our universe, like this story here, it's not even to say that it's within our universe. It could be, in some parallel universe. But he usually in my stories, he usually bites the dust, and then he, to his lament, revives at some point and has to do it again.
I have to ask, and if you want to refuse to answer this because it's a spoiler, I'm not sure if it is or not. But he talks about one character being able to snap his fingers and, create any reality in human history, any point in history or prehistory. And with all the technology in this story as well, were we talking about, virtual simulated realities there, or are we just sort of leaving it open? Because that was the first thing that hit my mind.
The implication, it's still vague, and so I think it is open to interpretation, but yeah. I was sort of slanting it toward that this was very specific to this story, even though it exists within the larger universe that I've created. The idea was kind of that wherever this Earth, quote, scare quotes, that the story is taking place, and this region within this scare quotes Earth might be subject to the whims of a holographic simulation or something, maybe even a little deeper than that, a little more complicated than that. I wrote another story called a few years ago called 49.5-foot woman straps it on, and the whole point of that, I was going to say thrust, but the whole point of that story was that an alien race had created hells for certain people as an experiment, and would put them through these simulated realities, but they weren't even simulated. They were actual functioning realities, but with a veneer of verisimilitude, so that they could rip the mask away at some point and go, yeah, you're in hell, and then start it all over again. So I won't say this is a sequel to that, but it kind of is attached to that idea that there's a advanced species out there that is so advanced that they literally can create realities. But whether that's wholly organic or whether that's some kind of a high-tech simulation is unclear.
And ultimately, doesn't matter if you're a thinking, self-aware being,
right?
And you're made out of atoms and molecules, or you're made out of bits and bytes,
right?
It still feels the same. You're still thinking. You're still that same being. So it's kind of academic at that point,
right? It's not and it's never been the point of the stories. The stories are more, I would say, actually more grounded in like a pulp aesthetic, and that the politics or the philosophy that informs it, these stories are secondary. They're there, but that's not a question. These stories are primarily interested in interrogating.
People are mentioning the Humphrey Bogart over your left shoulder, as he's always there when I chat with you on Zoom or interview you, and I just sort of think of that as the devil sitting on your shoulder. By the way, he's just right there informing your work. Maybe
I think maybe how the old Bogart and Chandler and a few others are always lurking around the corner in on the periphery for sure.
I want to get to the other writers, but I just occurred to me to ask a question of Sean, and any writers that want to shout out or any panelists, please do so. There was a book a while back, way before I ever got into this, whatever it is I'm doing in this community. Daryl Schweitzer's Cthulhu's Reign, which is, after the Lovecraftian apocalypse, different stories about that, versions of it. It was an anthology. And then wasn't there a World War Cthulhu put out by was it Brian Sammons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was.
What did I do now?
No, I'm in that book.
Oh.
So it's okay.
It's all right.
World War II was from Dark Regions Press. World War II was from Dark Regions Press.
Yeah, I think so.
It was great art by M. Wayne Miller. That was the big attraction.
Oh,
it was that and Pete's story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the stories were terrible. The art was fabulous. No, there's some good stories.
It just strikes me that I wanted to ask Sean about the difference between, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot because there is a difference between Weird World War IV, for example, and then these two other books. What do you think?
So I haven't personally read them, but based on the title, right? It sounds like the other books are confined mainly to the Lovecraftian mythos, whereas I would say Weird World War IV is inspired by it, but not confined to it. So, there are many stories that have, kind of operate from the mythos. So Rodney and Maurice's story definitely has elements, but it's also very different, and I think adds to the mythos in ways. John Mayberry's story also kind of straight down the middle, Lovecraftian mythos. But then you have Laird's story and Erica's story and T.C. McCarthy's story, and even John Langan's story, which are not traditionally Lovecraftian, but there are elements of the weird in all of those stories. So, and they're weird in different ways. So Laird's, for instance, and Laird and I talked about this, but he has, at least in my view, in my experience, when I read his stories, he has an uncanny ability to put an image in your head with a parsimony of words, right? And I don't like. I think. I mean, I'll let. He kind of gave me an answer, but I think Laird kind of do a better job of explaining where he does that. But he does that by intent, like he intended to do that. And then you have Erica's story, which it has like a Shirley Jackson-esque sort of feel, like, you know, kind of this oh shucks. And then when you tell the story, it's horrifying, kind of what happens at the end. And it's just very, very, very talented in how she pulls that off. And in you know, this volume, and even in the story that she has in Weird World War III. And it's also terrifyingly possible. And then I think Maurice and Rodney, you know, kind of really do an amazing job of kind of bringing in the history of Africa and colonialism and subverting a lot of the Lovecraftian tropes. And they're so different, but they're really rich stories. And, you know, no pressure, guys, but you know, if you want to talk about your stories, I was really impressed, consistently impressed with what I saw.
I would actually love to do that, as much as spoiler free as possible. I was going to ask Erica about that next. I thought maybe I should ask, does it really matter if people read Weird World War 4 versus 3 in order, or should they read 3 first?
They can read it. They can read it in any order, as long as they check out both.
Yeah, exactly. For those who are not quite sure what we're talking about, here's the back cover to Weird World War 3. It's a mouthful. A lot of W's. What if the United States had gone to war with the Soviet Union? What if these rival superpowers had fought on land, sea, air, and the astral plane? What if the Soviets and Americans had struggled for dominion across parallel dimensions or on the surface of the moon? How would the world have changed? What wonders would have been unveiled? What terrors would have haunted mankind from those dark and dismal dimensions? So that's 3. 4 is, what if there was a war after Armageddon? How would the survivors emerging from World War III's radioactive slag heaps fight in this conflict? Would they wage it with sticks and stones and sorcery, or would they use more refined weapons, elevating warfare to an art and unleashing bureaucratic nightmares worse than death? Would they struggle against themselves or interdimensional invaders? What horrors from the desolate darkness might slither into the light? So with that said, that, you know, the differences between these 2 books, Erica, would you want to talk about your story a bit, and as spoiler free as you can?
Sure. Thank you, Sean, for the comments. It's very flattering. So yeah, my stories, they aren't connected. They're 2 completely different stories, but the one in World War III is actually a story about an AI program that kind of becomes manifest and pits the Americans and the Russians against one another. It meant it to be kind of, it's based around the idea of Pokemon Go. At the time I came up with this story idea, I was playing a lot of Pokemon Go. I just got into the game kind of much later than everybody else. But I had the idea that, like, you know, what if it's actually technology itself kind of, you know, messing with us and you know, pitching us against each other kind of thing. I don't want to give away the whole story, but it's basically about, you know, kind of AI messing with us. My story in World War IV is called Twilight of the Godmakers. My husband came up with the title. I was having a hard time. He actually pulled his car off the road because he thought of the you know, story title. And I'm like, well, I have to use it now. But the story itself is about so basically a very conventional World War III is fought, non-nuclear. It's you know, kind of And in order to stop the basically the constant warfare, scientists created these kind of biological beings like these supermen who grew up very quickly and kind of, destroyed whole armies and whole factions. Basically modern warfare is guerrilla warfare. So, they couldn't really blanket them. It was more just like they went in and they took out the cells of people who were fighting, and that was it. And basically the supermen kind of fell into senility, and they've kind of been living on this compound for the past couple of decades. And there's some scientists give me the idea that like, oh, well, we're having some increased fighting again after a couple of decades of peace, relative peace. We should unleash them again. And they're trying to kind of wake them up and make them, kind of come to their senses again. And won't tell you what happens, but it's a dark story. It's a pretty dark story about kind of what happens when the weapon we created to stop one war is kind of the problem. Similar to nuclear weapons, similar to the nuclear there was awful, but similar to a lot of our technology that once it's been around a while, it degrades or it becomes broken. And what are we going to do when we actually need to use it and we can't?
Right. By the way, no pressure, Sean, but any future books you do, you might want to consider these two guys at the bottom of my screen, Pete and Rick. They're great writers. Rick's a great writer, and so
I'm working
Pete.
on something. So guys, reach out to me after, and I'll tell you what it is.
That said, let's talk to Maurice and Rodney. Tell us about your stories as much as you can without spoiling it.
Got you. Yeah. So when Sean reached out, I was actually in the middle of writing the first of my space trilogy. I have a trilogy of science fiction novels coming out. I think Sweep of Stars comes out in a month. And so I was already in this mindset of this Afrofuturist storytelling. And so when Sean came, like, hey, write something for this. And I'm just like, oh, well, this is going to take me kind of out of my brain space. And yet will it? Because I love theme anthologies, because I treat theme anthologies as like writing prompts and frankly challenges of how can I circumvent the rules that they've given me to do what I want anyway.
That's a really good way to look at it. Yeah, writing prompts.
Right. So and then killing a couple birds with one stone. Rodney and I've been talking a lot about writing and kind of pushing him to the next level in his writing. And so he'd been kind of is harassing the right word for wanting to see what my writing process was like. And I was just like, well, you want to see what my writing process is like? You're going to write this story with me. And by the way, it's due in about a month. So let's go. And now you can really feel what it's like to be a writer. So you got
now,
one
how did you guys do this? This is your first story, Rodney?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to condescend, talk down you or anything, but just asking. Did Maurice mentor you in this story? Did you guys kind of do a 50-50 sort of thing? How did it work out?
There was a moment where I was in the weeds a little bit, and so he just kind of held my hand and walked me through it. And I probably wrote the same scene probably 50 different times. And at one point I was like, you know what? Go with God. I love you. And he said it right. But yeah, it was just a lot of, well, it wasn't really a lot of back and forth, but it was probably 4 or 5 back and forths, and that was it. So, it took us 20 minutes to knock out the premise.
Right. Well, yeah, because in fact, that was likely one of the key learning areas where he was like rewriting this paragraph over and over and over again. And like by the 20th draft, I'm like, Rodney, do in a couple weeks. We don't have time for this. Let's get the story written. And so the premise, because like I said, I'm in this Afrofuturist mindset, is like, how can I write a story that is the critiques the present and is rooted in the past and still has this way of projecting into the future and imagining a future state. And the critique of the present would be, we'll say there's an institution that is a museum operating actually right up the street from me, operating in bad form in the community. Actually, it got spanked enough that it's now doing better now. But you know, it was operating in bad faith in the community, and so I'm as an artist, I'm here to critique that, and so I'm going to take that institution to task. And while I'm doing that, it's like, hey, by the way, there's a whole history here that one in how museums tend to operate in community, but then how can I use that to peel back the lens even further, or pull back the screen, I should say, a little further to talk about some other things. And one of those other things is like, hey, every time it seems to be a major world war and people are desperately in need of resources, it's like, hey, you know, Africa's there. Let's go ahead and carve that up again and get some more resources so we can rebuild. And so I wanted to have a chance to say, hey, you know, to talk about that sort of the history of that, and then Africa being the spot of one uniting, one with the nations within, but also with the diaspora in general. It's like, hey, you know, we're all in this together. So what does it look like for us to become this Pan-African community operating together? And what kind of future can we build together because of that? So we have all these different pieces and tensions I wanted to write about and examine in the course of the story.
Now, how did you two meet? Have you been friends for a while, or did you just meet?
Oh boy.
Or should I not answer?
We now?
Ask
What
this
is this?
question?
What, 14, 15 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to be a writer for a while, since, 14, 15 years ago, and Maurice does on the occasion now a convention called MoCon here in Indianapolis, and one of his guests of honor that year was somebody that I was really big into at the time. So I showed up and then skipped a couple, showed up again, and then I got plugged in with their writing group, and then he asked me to come on board and be his right-hand man for MoCon, and then it just kind of spiraled from there. Like, this dude's one of my best friends, you know. It was inevitable, I feel. So,
but he'd been talking about writing for a while, and it's like, all right, no, we're done talking now. You're going to do the thing.
Put up
I was gonna say kudos to you, Maurice, for I admire people who encourage others to realize their dreams instead of only focusing on your dream, if that makes sense.
So, well, writing is what I love, and frankly, I love to. I don't know. That sounds weird. It's what I love, and I like to spread the love. I mean, it makes writing sound like a venereal disease, but it's what I love to do. It's what I love teaching. It's what I love doing. It's how I breathe and how I navigate the world. It's how I process things going on in my life and in my world. You know, so the more I can help people realize that, helps me.
It is a socially transmitted disease. Certainly.
Right.
And it can be transmitted hundreds of years later. Somebody can be writing a story in a room somewhere, and then 150 years later, somebody reads that story and they've caught the disease, right? So, how do you guys feel, and Erica? I know how the rest of you feel about autumn. You guys like fall? I'm about to do an autumn Cthulhu.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've heard of the first one, but it's been too long. I've been a little preoccupied, but
so Sean, this is where Mike poaches your writers for his own projects.
Hey, they can still do his projects.
Yeah, it's more.
It's not like I put out 5 anthologies a year or anything. I'm kind of slow.
Well, tying into what Maurice and Rodney were talking about, you realize when you publish an author, you're also every editor that ever published them.
Yeah. Let's see, who do we got left here? You guys have talked about your stories. Laird, did you say much about yours? You said a little bit about it.
I'm sure I said plenty about it in my few minutes.
All right. So, when did 4 come out, Sean? Just in the last couple of months?
So it comes out this Tuesday. So you can pre-order it now, but the launch day is March 1st.
Oh, okay. So I've got art. I've got an art. Thank you for that. So the timing of this, I usually like to leave politics out of the show. This is an escape from all that. But I think it will be kind of impossible to do in this situation. And you got some expertise in this area. you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, and when we talk about politics, I'll keep it
Not
keep it as
domestic
at the
politics, yeah. Just,
geopolitical level, which
I
so
think most of us can agree that Putin's not a good guy. I think we're probably all on the same page there.
the scary thing is, so about a month ago, I started a YouTube channel, and the purpose of the YouTube channel was primarily to promote these books. And then Putin moved about 190,000 troops on 3 sides of Ukraine. So I started talking to, friends that I know from, I guess, the security side. So when I did my master's degree, my thesis advisor was Ash Carter, and I worked on Iran's nuclear program as kind of my master's thesis. For those who don't know, Ash Carter is the architect of the Nunn-Lugar program, and the Nunn-Lugar program is the program that denuclearized Ukraine. So, which, at the time it was a good idea because of the potential for loose nukes and things like that. And I would contend it was still a good idea because the fewer nuclear armed nations you have, the less likely there's going to be a leak or somebody acquires weapons from poor stewardship, etc. But and then he subsequently became Obama's Secretary of Defense. So I have some training on military strategy. I have 5 years of detailed experience fighting like a Russian, using Russian doctrine and tactics. So I had a show on January 27th where I not only predicted Putin was going to do what he was going to do, but I predicted exactly how he was going to do it. Because I just looked at the map and it was clear that given the historical relationship between the Ukrainians and Russians, I mean, there are multiple familial ties on both sides of the border. And I think Putin just wanted to control it. He didn't want to destroy it. And, as such, the most logic, and then given the location of where the troops were on the border, you had some troops in Belarus, which didn't make any sense unless you look at a map and realize that you could send troops through Belarus down to Ukraine without having to make a river crossing along the Dnieper, right? Or the Dnieper, I can't pronounce it. And that's exactly what happened, right? Putin went for a quick victory, decapitation strike against the regime. I expected cyber attacks to start it off, which happened. I expected to see, and by the way, you can look and watch that episode and you'll see I made all these predictions. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but what terrified me is that I could put myself in Putin's head like that. And that the good news though is the Ukrainians have had about 20 years to experience like real freedom, and they're not having any of this. I think Putin expected them to just fold, to change the government, and then everything would be fine. And he grossly miscalculated. One thing that my network has told me, and this is outside of U.S. intelligence. This is not U.S. intelligence. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But when Putin was in the KGB, one of his weaknesses, according to his performance reviews, is he had a tendency to underestimate risk. And I think that's a bit of what's happened in this situation. The good news, though, is one thing I've been relatively surprised by is the media, kind of what you've seen on the media exception. Like it's any building that's hit, any civilian that dies is a terrible thing. But if you compare this campaign to how Putin came into what Putin did to Grozny, he's actually been relatively, and again, I think Putin's a bad guy. I want to make that very clear, but he's been relatively restrained because I think for good reason, which is he wants to take the infrastructure relatively unharmed and undamaged. And at the end of the day, he sees Ukrainians as Russians. And what I'm worried about is that when he finds that he's not going to be as successful, because the Ukrainians are doing standard things that an overmatched adversary would do, right? They're putting anti-aircraft machinery and things like that in civilian areas and things like that, which, again, if I'm playing the Ukrainian hand, and I'm going to do what I need to do to survive. So I'm not judging, but that also makes it difficult for the Russians to come in and take this machinery. The other piece that's coming out loud and clear is the Ukrainians had an opportunity to, for several years cross-trained with U.S. forces and different. Like I had a friend who did a parachute operation with them in terms of friendship, things like that. But they're fighting more like a Western military fights, and the difference between the way that the Russians fight and Western military fights is Western country, militaries tend to have a very strong NCO corps, non-commissioned officers, who are experienced, really good leaders. Even when I was a lieutenant, when I came in, I had like Sergeant Hale, my platoon sergeant, had 15 years of experience, and I was a second lieutenant, right? You can't spell lost without LT. Like I didn't know what I was doing, and he put his arm around me and showed me like what you're supposed to do. He's very experienced. So the Russians are predominantly a conscript army. So their elite units like Spetsnaz and things like that are going to be kind of more of the dead enders and better trained. But even those units, I found out yesterday that some of their junior ranks, they do like 1 year rotations in and out. So they're not even as experienced as, say, like our Delta operators and things like that.
Well,
so you have this
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So you have a conscript army that when they're captured, they claim, with, likely some truth, that they didn't know they were going to go in and invade Ukraine. They were told they were going to go in the middle of an exercise. And, if someone captured someone from the 82nd Airborne and the guy said, and somebody from the 82nd Airborne said that, you don't believe them, because they're told exactly what they're doing. But with the Russians, it's kind of that might be semi-plausible with the lower conscript. So it's sad to see this happening. If the Ukrainians hold on for another week, the Russians have always traded quantity or have always traded quantity for quality. So their weapons and tanks are going to start breaking down, because they don't have the same logistical support and footprint that the US does. So anyway, I've said a lot. and I want to give people a chance to, and again, people are tuning in not to hear me talk about Russia, so I want to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thanks for that. I think it was good to address. And I've got some more questions for the writers, if that's all right. We've talked about Weird War 3 and 4. Can we talk? Let's start with Laird. Laird, what have you published recently that maybe people have missed, possibly, that you'd like to let them know about? And what do you have coming up soon that you'd like to let people know about?
The most recent novel I had published came out in 2020, Worse Angels, which is part of the Isaiah Coleridge detective series. Right. I'm actually getting ready to, and I've had several short stories published. I've had stories, obviously this one's coming out, the big whimper coming out here in just a couple days. I've had a couple come out with or forthcoming from Ellen Datlow's anthologies. I had one come out in her Shirley Jackson tribute anthology, When Things Get Dark. I had a story in there called Tiptoe, which it's pretty recent. It's about 3 months ago. And she has another major anthology coming out, I want to say June, from Tor Nightfire, which is a monster.
Yeah, she emailed me something about it to get on the show and talk about it. I think she said June.
Right. Screams from the Dark, I believe that's called. And
yeah,
both of them are kind of who's who of the weird fiction horror community. We have a ton of, there's some repeats in them, but there's also just this huge variety of authors, but it's sort of, like I said, sort of like a who's who. And then I have another one I'm particularly proud of coming out this fall. It was just announced. Titan Books is putting out an anthology called Isolation, and it's a horror anthology, and it's
that
talks.
looks really awesome.
I'm pretty excited about that one. Brian Evanson's in there, and Ken Liu, and just a ton of, it's like I said, it's a who's who.
Paul and Joe and
Joe Lansdale's in there, and I have a story in there called So Easy to Kill, which would fit right in with the weird World War IV kind of, except it's infinitely weirder than that, or exponentially weirder than that.
Well,
so
I learned about Isolation either yesterday or the day before through a tweet somehow, and I retweeted it saying it looked really good, and I looked at the cover and I looked at what the book was about, and I thought, if Laird Barron isn't in this, somebody did something wrong, because it just seemed tailor-made for you.
Once again, we all been talking about, and to Maurice's point about writing prompts, that's exactly what how I look at the themes. They're not straitjackets, they're prompts. And Isolation, though, is an easy, I mean, that's just, it's kind of like a few years ago, I was in one with Ellen, and I was in another one with Christopher Golden. They weren't vampire anthologies, but they were about vampirism. And vampirism is such a vast, I mean, it's a niche, but it's within that niche. It's pretty darn, there's a spectrum. And same thing with Isolation. What kind of isolation are we talking about? So I'm really proud to be in that one. And
well, you've had a lot of experience with that in your life, and you yeah.
But I didn't, here's the thing though, I didn't, once again, I tried to play against type, because I'm pretty sure, because people were speculating when they heard about it initially, oh, it's going to be one of his noir wilderness stories. And no, it's a science fiction horror story, a la Corbin or Jack Vance.
Oh, cool.
X-rated, horrifying, kind of a mind fuck of a story. It's not a noir hard, even though there are noir elements. It's not one of my noir, wilderness hard bark characters type of story.
When was your last collection published?
That was Swifted Chase 2016, and I'll close with this. I'm working on two collections and a novel right now. And they're all quite different from one another, but the one that I'm getting ready to hand into my agent would be not a sequel to Swifted Chase, but contemporary weird fiction and horror, crime, mystery, that, kind of the flavor of books that I've done before. And then we'll see what happens. Hopefully that would be something that would come out within the next year or two, if I can find somebody.
Yeah, because I was thinking it was about time for another.
Yeah, it'll be
Laird Barron collection.
If I give it to her and it's up to snuff and we can find somebody, it would be 7 years, which I think is cool. And then the other, it's time. I've had books in between. I've been working on novels. So this is last couple of years though, I've been cranking away with short stories again, which is my first passion. So you haven't seen much, but I'm looking at having between 20 and 25 stories over a 2-year period, coming out or being coming out as originals in that collection. And then the other collection is the dark fantasy science fiction collection that I'm about half to 2/3 of the way to completing.
Oh, I can't wait. That's great. Erica, tell us a little bit more about your book, and then maybe whatever else you want to tell us about what you've published and maybe what's coming up in the near future for you.
Sure. Let's show the cover again. My collection. So it came out in November 2021. And
say the title again, because the majority of my audience listens on the go without the video.
How to Get to Apocalypse and Other Disasters.
Okay.
And my name is very, very I'm basically the only person with any kind of internet footprint with my last name. So, it's kind of great for people being able to find your writing and being able to it's like perfect CEO there.
Yeah, try Googling Mike Davis. It's like John Smith.
But I never have to worry about anybody, like stealing my identity either, because I would definitely know like right away.
Yeah.
So it basically it came out in November 2021 from Fairwood Press. I've actually known the publisher of Fairwood for since I moved to Portland in 2014, because I think we met somewhere, and then I went to one of his writing retreats. He holds a writing retreat every spring, or rather November, March. So there's one going on this week actually that I'll be going to. But I talked to him, and I was so nervous because at that point I had like about 40 short stories published, and I was like, I really want a collection. I really want him to publish it. And I was so nervous, but I sent him an email saying, hey, if you ever have an idea of putting it together, a collection of my stories. And he was very nice. He wrote back and said, he's full up, but thanks for, he'll think about it. And then about a year later, after the pandemic, he emails like, you want to do it? And so we did. So it's 23 stories, the 21 reprints, and then 2 originals, and it's mostly dark science fiction. A lot of them are about like aliens or evil technology or the apocalypse. And I think there's a couple of pandemics in there. So
just cheery little topics.
Cheery topics. It's then I just naturally kind of gravitate toward that kind of stuff. My first published story, if it counts, was a story that came out in Clark's World, and it was about basically the entire world being destroyed by a pandemic, and there's like very few survivors, and the aliens just kind of coming by to help people, repopulate, even though it's probably not going to happen. And so I basically always just kind of, it's weird because even though I wouldn't call myself a horror writer, it seems like people who like horror seem to like my stuff more than science fiction and fantasy readers. So I probably should write more standard horror. If anything.
Well, I don't know about should, but that's funny because when Emma Gibbon was on the show, I think it was her husband. I'm probably saying this completely wrong. I'm sorry, Emma. I know you listen to these, but something to the effect of somebody said she was a horror writer, and she went to her husband and she said, "Do you think I'm a horror writer?" He goes, "Well, of course you're a horror writer. What'd you think you were?" So, and John Connolly, he was a couple years ago. He writes the Charlie Parker mysteries that have supernatural in them, mostly detective, but with a maybe a 10%, maybe a hint of the supernatural in them, depending on which book it is. And he was surprised that he got an award in a horror category because he didn't think he was writing horror. So
that actually also happened to me in a big way, because my novel Stay Crazy, which is now out of print, it came out in 2016, but I thought it was just a contemporary set science fiction story, and it got a nomination. Then it won a British Fantasy Award, and it's like, this is fantasy, but it takes place with like dimensions and space and things. And my husband's like, yeah, well, there's no real science in that. It's not scientific. And I'm like, well, it's the trappings. I don't know. And he's like, no, it's urban fantasy. We're going to call it urban fantasy now. So I've called it an urban fantasy since then.
All labels, right? Yeah.
I don't do labels. I just kind of write whatever, and then
So this is a collection that'll be coming out soon. Then did I understand it correctly?
Came out in November 2021.
Okay, I thought you were talking about another book in addition to this.
No, that was a novel that came out. I talked.
Okay, I apologize. So,
but this one came out in November 2021. It got a lot of really good press. Washington Post lists as one of the best science fiction books of the year.
Oh wow!
It's got shout outs in Locus. It gets actually on the Locus recommended reading list. So yeah, it's gotten a lot of really great press, which I'm super happy about because like I said, I write pretty much just short stories, and it's great seeing them, kind of get like some recognition.
I will check it out. Is it available on Kindle as well?
It's on Kindle and pretty much any online store. Not probably not in bookstores because it is a print on demand press, but definitely on Amazon and definitely from like special orders.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Weird World War 3 and 4 are also on Kindle, by the way.
That's
folks, to the audience. Last but not least, Rodney and Maurice, what's going on with you guys and what's coming up soon that you'd like to mention? And
Let's see.
the audience out there, like maybe meeting you for the first time.
Gotcha.
What would you say? Hey, go check this out.
Right. Well, first off, I've had to keep us strictly on mute because anytime Laird or Erica talks about their short stories, Rodney keeps making these happy noises. So so y'all keep writing. Goodness. Let's see. As far as writing prompts go, last year I did a short story for the Black Panther anthology, which was like the culmination of all my geek dreams. You can't see the rest of my office right now, but I'm actually surrounded by 20,000 comic books, and so to be able to write Black Panther, whose entire cast was actually above me in Funko figures, that was a huge dream for me. Let's see. I have a story coming out in the upcoming Alien versus Predator anthology.
Nice.
And a short story it's called Classic Monsters Unleashed, and it's the Hollywood Monsters anthology. And I have taken on the Invisible Man. So those are some short stories. Oh, and I got one more short story actually coming out. Actually, in the next issue of Weird Tales, I have a story that takes H.P. Lovecraft's story, Dreams of the Witch House, and I've reimagined it I've literally remixed it using a hip hop artist as the main characters, and it's called Dreams of the Cipher House. And so that'll be coming out here before too long. And then on the novel front, in about 1 month, Sweep of Stars, the first in my Afrofuturist science fiction trilogy, comes out. And then 2 weeks after that, my second middle grade detective novel, Unfadable, comes out.
All right.
So trying to stay busy.
Maurice, have you heard the Dreams in the Witch House rock opera?
I have not.
Oh, I have that on the LP.
Incredible.
It's great.
I have not.
It's absolutely incredible.
Really quite
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that tracks with what I was doing with the hip hop thing then. So
Rodney, you got something in the works yet? I know this is your first one, so I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, just cranking away at some other stories, trying to get them out on submission, and we'll see where it goes from there. So
what I don't want to keep you guys too long, but what have you guys been? I'm always curious about what the writers, editors, artists that I'm interviewing, what have you read or watched lately, or that really intrigued you, that you like a lot, that you'd like to give a shout out to the audience? For example, I watched the first season so far of a TV series called Servant, which is just weird as hell. It's on Apple TV. I honestly don't know how to describe it and do it justice. And then I watched the first 3 episodes of a show called From. Have any of you watched that one?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard great things about it.
Yeah. What'd you think, Laird?
It's okay. I'll give
Yeah.
it that. It's okay. I've watched 4 episodes.
Was
And
the
I-
4th one dropped? Okay.
The fourth one really, it turned me off from the series a little bit. I'm going to continue to watch. I like the first 3, but I'm just afraid it's more lost. How many seasons of not telling us what's going to happen is what we're going to get?
Yeah,
We'll see.
Just having seen 3, I'm really loving the concept of it, the idea behind it.
Yeah,
But it
absolutely.
seems like they're taking a little bit too long to
My
get there.
right, and so my complaint is really not a fair one, because what if they do reveal everything? So that's just my worry about how it's developing. My one real complaint about it, keeps me from really loving it, just I think it's underwritten. I think the characters are extremely underwritten, and they're all Stephen King types. You got the kind of a special needs person, and we've got the angry parents, and the Children of the Corn parents with their Children of the Corn kids, and everything is literally out of the Stand or something like that. And it's a little underwritten, but it has good production values, and the idea of this purgatorial town that's haunted by demonic presences is that's enough to keep me going. And also I like a lot of the actors in it too.
Yeah.
But I'm not giving it, like, the one thing I watched recently that I really liked was it is what it is, but I like Chapelwaite quite a bit.
Oh yeah, that was good. I think there's an actual order to season 2, which I don't know how that would work, but
Me neither.
But season 1 was certainly great. And Adrian Brody, what an actor.
Right. Once again, the actors, he really carried it. So like I said, I don't, it's not necessarily my top 5 TV series of all time, but I thought it was really one of the better ones that's come out in a long time.
Yeah. Anybody else? What have you guys been reading and watching?
Yellow Jackets is man.
I've heard of that one, but
I don't want to say too much because I'm just gonna gush, but man.
Maybe I shouldn't ask this, but is it supernatural? I've heard that it's really good.
No.
No. I mean, that's not a negative.
Right.
I was just wondering.
Yeah.
So, right. Anything else? Books, TV, movies?
So I'm watching, and this is a deviation for me. I'm watching the 4th season of Star Trek Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I am really enjoying it because of 2 things. One, I think the storyline is pretty good. I think it's actually better than the storyline for Picard. But more, I'm really enjoying the character development and the diversity of characters that are presented as part of this crew. And it really just reminds me of the original Star Trek, willing to take risks and deal with questions about race and gender and politics, and which I haven't seen in a long time. But season 4 of Discovery is really just putting it out there.
Well, you and Rick, I was going to tell you, you and Rick finally convinced me. I started Discovery season 1, so I'm about 4 episodes in.
So Discovery season 1, I was not a fan of.
Yeah, you guys told me stick with it, and then 2 gets better.
2 gets better, and 3 gets better, and I think, in many ways, 4 presents what I think of as like the anti-Enterprise crew, because instead of being all older guys, it's all young, very capable women. And I watched a whole bunch of conversations that reflected and reminded me of the conversations between Kirk and Scotty, or Kirk and McCoy, or Kirk and Spock, but it was done between women. And it just seemed natural. It seemed real. And it's stuff I'm not seeing anywhere else. And maybe that's because I'm not watching enough, or I'm not watching in the right places. But to me,
I don't see how that's possible.
It's a real breakthrough in terms of rethinking science fiction.
Well, at long last, we're going to get a Dracula movie with Nicolas Cage.
Oh God,
playing Dracula.
That's gonna be funny.
I thought he was playing Renfield.
And the title is Renfield. I think he's
okay.
playing Dracula. But at this point, whenever I see a movie, it's getting so bad that when Nick Cage is not in a movie that I'm watching, I'm wondering what's wrong, what happened,
Yeah. I guess The only other thing I want to say here is, Sean, I want you to go back and do Weird War One, because I think the publisher is wrong. I have thought about it.
So let it be written. So let it be done.
I'm 100% with you on that one.
Okay, so I just want to put it. Okay,
I'm not saying my publisher's wrong. I'm not 100% there, but
Okay.
I would edit.
Yeah,
I would
you
edit
better
the
not.
hell out of that anthology. I would love it.
I just the scenario I've always thought about is the Germans allied with other European nations in using the journey to the center of the earth and what they found down there versus the British dinosaurs that are now being brought back from the Lost World.
And you wouldn't necessarily have to stick to the story, right? It could be alternate World War One
Right.
histories.
But there's so much that could be done with, if you look at what science fiction had been done prior to World War One. And I'm excited. I'm doing this because I'm excited, because I love the idea of taking all those lost world stories and then throwing them into a World War One mix.
Yeah, I think that the diversity of stories that you'll see from that anthology are there's a lot of places where you still could go, and that's certainly one of them. And I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be done there. So
I don't suppose anybody besides me is looking forward to the Batman coming out in a week or two.
no, you are in fact the only person in the country interested in the Batman.
I thought so. Yeah.
With you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go watch it, but I'm definitely looking forward to watching this sort of horror take on Batman.
As much of a fan as I am of Batman, which is no secret, I just don't know that I want to brave the theater and all the kids with their cell phones and everything. So I'll probably wait till it goes streaming. So
Also 3 hours long, so
well,
Right.
yeah.
Video's the way to go. I just actually,
Absolutely.
not to hijack this, but I just watched the extended cut of
Hijack away.
Hateful Eight, which I've watched several times. I've watched there was some director's kind of cut, and I watched the original in the theater actually. And the 4 hour, it was roughly 4 hours, broken up into natural breaking points, is actually really well done. Like, that's a new way to, it was a completely different experience. There's more, obviously there's a lot of stuff that was cut from the theatrical release, but it's kind of hard because it's so seamlessly done. And it's not like a lot of series that you see on cable television where they, or even regular network TV where you have the warehouse fights in Buffy that go on forever to fill up an episode. There's not, like, the dialogue is smooth all the way through, the stuff that was cut. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have cut it, because it's pretty tight cut with 2.5 hours or whatever it was, but it really is cool to see it as a 4 hour mini series. I really highly was shocked. I was just watching it to take it apart because I had some theories about that it's a Thing reboot, or excuse me, reimagining of the Carpenter's The Thing.
It is.
Which, right.
And until I said that.
And of course, somebody else said, well, it's also an homage to Peckinpah, which absolutely tracks too. That, it can be more, like he said, it can be more than one thing. I'm like, absolutely. The Peckinpah is quite over with the splatter and just the way that violence is conducted in it, and spares no one. But anyway, I just want to toss that out. And as far as books go, because we should be saying something about books. I have a whole heap that I've been reading, to read for blurbs or whatever. One of them that I wanted to mention, just very new, is Kurt Favre's We Are Happy, We Are Doomed collection. Super good.
Okay.
There's others, but I'll just toss that out for now. That's a really good one.
Where can we find the extended Hateful Eight?
Netflix.
And not to hijack, but speaking of extended, how great was Zack Snyder's Justice League?
I liked it a lot better than Whedon's.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But I mean, that's a low bar. But I mean, I liked it a hell of a lot better. So did Jessica, and she's the resident DC fanatic, and there's no comparison. She really enjoyed Snyder Cut.
Yeah,
So
I did too.
when I was growing up, my grandmother used to take me to this movie theater that ran old movies. So in the 70s, I got to see It's a Mad, 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 Mad World and My Fair Lady on the big screen.
Nice.
And those films have something that I think we might be getting back to. Intermissions. You want to put a three hour.
Those of us who watch at home do not need intermissions.
Right. But if you want me to go to the theater to see a 3 to 4 hour film for a movie, I'm going to need an intermission. And guess what? You'll sell more popcorn.
You're absolutely right.
And, just bring it back.
The Hateful Eight had an intermission when it came out the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they don't do those long movies is that they can't run 2 separate showings a night, and they lose money that way.
Exactly. Well, speaking of books, Sundial by Catriona Ward. I don't know if you guys have read The Last House on Needless Street, but it was fantastic. Sundial is fantastic. Kat's fantastic, and she's really nice, really talented. She's going to be on the podcast at a special time and place on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So March the 2nd, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, if you can't catch it live, you can always watch the recorded later or listen to it. But it's really great. So there's that, and then this is up and coming. All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes. Well, I won't get into it, but you can look it up. There's a reason why I'm pulling it up, because it's something I really, really want to read. And then I requested these two and got them. Nothing But Black and Teeth. Has anybody read this one yet? It's been out for a bit. Yeah. And then Devil House by John Darnielle. He wrote another book that I am blanking on the name of right now.
It's a Wolf and White Van.
Beg your pardon.
That's one of them. Yeah.
Wolf and he has 2 other books though. One is Wolf and White Van.
That's
and
not it.
Universal Harvester.
Yes.
Universal Harvester. That's the one I'm thinking of. Man, I love the hell out of that book. I thought that was just great.
Very cool.
And the setting in the mid to late 90s with the video stores and everything doesn't hurt either. So anyway, pick those books up. Let's see. Sundial is coming out on Tuesday, on March 1st. So you can pick that up fairly quickly. So anything else, guys?
Have you watched Peacemaker yet?
No, should I?
Yes.
I've watched Peacemaker. I really enjoyed it.
I
I'm
enjoyed
almost
it far more than I
And
should.
what happens at the end, you're gonna love.
I know what happens at the end already.
I am ashamed to admit that I enjoyed every minute of that show.
It was a lot better than I thought. So I liked it too, except the credits. The credits are so stupid.
Is
Okay.
this like a Deadpool wannabe thing, or
No.
okay?
No spoilers, guys.
Yeah. Okay. So Matt, what you have to realize is that the choreographer had to develop that opening without meeting with the actors, alone with her husband, who happens to be I Am a Leaf on the Wind.
Alan
Tudyk.
Yeah.
And she had to develop it without meeting the actors.
Wait. What you're saying is they got a whole bunch of weed, and this is the result.
Yes. But yeah, basically she had to create a dance routine for actors who are not dancers without ever meeting them and without able to really direct them at all.
And it's genius.
And
I
it
think
came
it's
out,
genius.
I just really, yes, it's a ridiculous opening, but it works for the show.
It's the only opening for any show I've ever seen where I always have to watch the opening before I watch the show.
Yeah.
I
So
can't explain
everyone's
why.
seen it but
I
me.
don't
That's what you
understand
guys
it.
are
It just
saying.
works.
You always have something different in the dance moves.
Yeah.
I
I
didn't
always-
want to like it, but I did. It's the best recommendation you can give.
Yeah. I honestly think that
Damn it, you
it's kind of
guys.
based on Space Invaders. Like the whole thing is sort of based on the Space Invaders, that original opening where they just march side by side. But anyway, that's just me.
I have 2 books and 2 shows, if that
Yes, sir.
helps. So you've already talked about this one on your show, but I think it's called Under Twin Suns. It's the Carcosa
yeah.
anthology. Yeah, I
You wouldn't
enjoyed
believe
that.
how many times James gets asked if he's related to Robert Chambers. Since
Yeah, I know
Chambers
he's
is-
not, because that was the
No,
first
he's
question
not.
I had when I picked it up. But so I
It's a
think
beautiful
I think
book.
I have the last story left on that, but I'm enjoying that.
It's
The other one's
nominated for a Stoker.
Yeah,
it should be.
it's a beautiful
And then
book.
the second book is a nonfiction book, which makes it 10 times as creepy as it otherwise would be. But there's a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and it's based on a former Defense Intelligence Agency official who investigated the Skinwalker Ranch. So I just leave it at that, but I couldn't sleep for about 2 nights after reading it. And then in terms of shows, there's
What was the
an
title
Apple
again, John?
Skinwalkers at the Pentagon.
Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Okay.
It
Could you
came
give
out
us just a
in-
little bit more about that without
Yeah.
spoiling?
Yeah. So have you all seen the New York Times report in I think it might have been 2018, 2017, where there was the
It's on Kindle Unlimited.
UAPs, I forget what it stands for, but unidentified aerial phenomena with the USS Nimitz and things like that, where they saw these like aircraft. And there was a program that Senator Harry Reid set up called ATIP, the Advanced Aeronautical Identification Program, something like that. It's a $22 million program to identify kind of anomalous phenomena in the skies, figure out what it is. So as part of that program, they also investigated the phenomena at the Skinwalker Ranch. And by that, there's, over for hundreds of years, there's like people have reported seeing like canid like bipeds, blue orbs, having like a really terrifying feeling that's not explained by anything. I think at least that particular thing could be something related to infrasound, but
Right
Laird
now,
and I
my
talk-
mom is writing down the title to this book because she loves this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's look, it could be government disinformation for all I know, like, but it's terrifying. But the thing that's terrifying about it is you had the government investigate some of this phenomenon with PhDs and things like that, and they were working with classified information, so they couldn't tell their families about it. So when some of these folks went back to their homes, their children and their wives reported seeing some of this phenomena. So they started modeling it with an R naught, like the number you get with when you're tracking a pandemic. So it has like a contagion associated with it. So I think they identified it as an R naught of 3. But for all the book doesn't conclude with what this stuff is, right? Is it kind of UFOs? Is it transdimensional? Is it just some phenomena that science hasn't identified yet, but we will, 100 years from now? I don't know. But the fact that this stuff followed them back is terrifying. So check it out. It's like I read it in one sitting, and I'm a very slow reader. But
Well, you've convinced me, and just for the audience, it's on Kindle Unlimited. If you're on Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free, and it's available in print as well. Looks like.
So those are the 2 books. The 2 shows. One, I don't know if it's supernatural yet because it just started, but there's a show called Severance, and it's about
Oh yeah,
yeah, a
I've
group of
watched the
people.
first episode.
Yeah. So for the audience, the conceit or the premise behind the show is that these people work at a corporation, and they agree to have a medical procedure such that they don't remember what they do on the inside, and the people who they are when they're on the inside of the company don't know what their lives are outside the company. So it is pretty creepy stuff, but I don't, again, it's like 1 or 2 episodes in, so there's not a lot of explanation behind what's going on.
The first episode to me was kind of a mixture of the bureaucratic office space TPS reports without the humor, but with the creepiness aspect of it. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing what episode 2 and 3 and 4 does.
It's like every corporate experience I've ever had. It's like that, like where people are trying to be funny, but they're not funny, but you have to laugh.
Right.
Or it's it's a little bit hyperbolic, but I actually wrote a story about in Vestarian that is kind of a little bit more Legadian, but it's called Radix Malorum. But it's, I had to exercise some of those demons, having worked at GE for one period of time in my life.
And office jobs. My first job, I was this skinny 17-year-old in Texas, standing on an assembly line all day long, 10 hours a day. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And this woman comes up to me. She was like in her mid 30s or something. And she goes, you're really lucky. And I was like, I am. She's like, yeah. To get this is a good job, to get this job at such a young age, and it's got really great job security. So I just want you to know that it's got great job security. So she was thinking, she was like making my day, encouraging me or something. And I was like horrified. I thought I could see myself for the next 50 years standing on that assembly line, and I was just like, nope. I think I was gone a week later.
The torture for me is I'm somebody who says what they think, and most people in that environment don't say what they think, and it can be
no, they don't.
It can be torture. But okay, so that's the first show. The second show there's no weird elements, but there's certainly like a spy element. So have you all seen? It's been around for, I think the 4th season just started. Have you all seen Snowfall? Anybody?
I don't think I have.
So it is about the crack epidemic in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And it covers not just like, it covers the neighborhood where it happens, and like the good kid who becomes a drug dealer. It covers the cartels. So there's characters from the cartels, and it covers a CIA operative who uses the money to fund the Contras. Like it is extremely well done. And it's one of those kind of stories where as the characters converge, they become increasingly, I don't want to use the word evil, but evil. It is well done.
Is this fiction based on realistic situations, or is it a reality type show?
I believe it's fiction, but it's based on things that kind of went down during that period of time.
And it has a good look too.
Okay. All right. Well, good to see you, Bill. Everyone, anybody, unless anyone has anything else, I just wanted to thank you guys for coming today and talking about Weird World War 3 and 4. And 4 comes out on Tuesday. Is that right, Sean?
That's right. March 1st.
March 1st.
But you can order now, and it should arrive around Tuesday.
Yeah, if you order the Kindle, of course, you'll get it right away that day. And
That's
then good to see you, Laird. Haven't seen you in a while. Maurice, Rodney, good to meet you guys. Erica, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
You guys, thanks for being here. Matt, you have a prize?
Why, yes, I do. Remember, it is this hardcover comic book anthology, Cthulhu is Hard to Spell. If you want to win it, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put a spell in the subject heading. We'll do a drawing in about 6 weeks. You could win this book.
If you're not a Patreon, maybe think about it. I don't want to be a used car salesman, so I'll just briefly mention it. But we have some really good content on there. The latest being a conversation between 6 writers that I really admire: Kathy Koja, John Paget. Shit, I'm blanking on the names, but they're actually, let me pull it up.
It's a real good episode too. It's a great
Yeah,
conversation.
thank you. I just get brain fog sometimes. It is. Give me 1 second here. A conversation with Kathy Koja, John Paget, Emma J. Gibbon, Max Stanton, Ina Efris, and Matt Carden. So if you know any or all of these writers, you can imagine what a great conversation this was. So, you know,
The
all of
writers
this-
from all different periods, you know,
yeah,
some of them are just starting, some of them have been around a long time, some of them are young, some of them are old, and it's just, most of them are short story writers. It's just nice variety of perspectives all at once.
yeah. And all of them do something that I think is just, whatever they're doing, their writing it's really unique, you know. So anyway, that's just one feature, and you get it all for $5 a month. And of course there's added incentives from there. But anyway, guys, thanks for being here. Good to see all of you, and I hope to see you all again soon. So
Thanks
have
for
a great
having us.
night.
Right. Have a good night.
Night.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.